What happens when a beloved British icon walks into what should have been a light-hearted daytime chat, only to face the most humiliating ambush of his career? In just 36 seconds, one cutting remark would turn Sir Cliff Richard from a gracious guest into a visibly shaken man defending his dignity, and transform Denise Welch from talk show host to the most criticized woman in Britain. The ITV studios buzzed with their usual midday energy as Sir Cliff Richard made his way down the corridor toward the Loose Women set. At 73, the legendary singer had come to talk about his upcoming tour and reflect on his remarkable decades-long career. What he didn't know was that this appearance would become one of the most talked-about moments in British television history. He settled into the guest chair, his trademark smile calm and genuine as he greeted the panel. Denise Welch sat at the center, flanked by Nadia Sawalha, Linda Robson, and Kay Adams. The atmosphere should have been warm, celebratory, even... But there was a chill in Denise's tone from the very first question. "So, Cliff," she began, her voice sharp enough to cut through the polite laughter of the audience. "Here you are again, still performing at your age. Don't you think it's time to hang up the microphone and let someone younger take the spotlight?" The words landed like a slap. Cliff's smile flickered for the briefest moment before he gathered himself with the composure of a man who'd spent a lifetime in front of cameras. "Well, Denise," he said evenly, "as long as people want to hear me sing, and as long as I'm able to do it, age is just a number. Music doesn't have an expiry date." His answer was calm, but the tension was already thick in the room. Nadia shifted in her seat, offering a diplomatic lifeline. "What's amazing is how you've managed to maintain your voice and passion after all these years." But Denise wasn't done. She leaned forward, her expression hardening. "That's all very nice, Nadia, but let's be honest. Cliff, your last few albums were commercial flops. The charts are full of artists who weren't even born when you started. Isn't this just about ego at this point?" The studio fell silent. Even the camera operators hesitated. Linda Robson's mouth opened slightly in shock, and Kay Adams looked visibly uneasy. Cliff straightened in his seat. "I'm sorry, Denise, but I'd have to disagree. My fans have supported me for over 50 years. They still come to my concerts. They still buy my records. I'm not sure what you mean by commercial disasters." "Oh, come on," Denise interrupted, her voice rising. "Your last album barely cracked the top 50. You're clinging to a past that wasn't that glorious to begin with." Gasps rippled through the audience. Cliff's face flushed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "Denise, I came here to talk about my tour, to connect with viewers who've supported me for decades. I'm not sure why this has turned into a personal attack." "Attack you?" She laughed, though the sound was hollow. "I'm just asking what everyone's thinking. When you look in the mirror, do you see a relevant artist or an old man trying to relive something that's long gone?" That was the breaking point. Nadia couldn't stay quiet any longer. "Denise, that's incredibly unfair. Sir Cliff is a legend who's brought joy to millions." "Oh, please, Nadia," Denise snapped, now turning her fire toward her co-host. "Just because someone's old doesn't make them a legend. Half the viewers watching probably don't even know who he is." Cliff looked stunned, more hurt than angry. "In all my years of doing television," he said softly, "I've never been spoken to quite like this. I don't know what I've done to deserve this hostility." "Hostility?" Denise shot back. "This is called honest journalism, Cliff. Maybe you're just not used to someone telling you the truth instead of fawning over you." Linda finally intervened. "Denise, maybe we should move on and talk about the tour dates." But Denise wasn't finished. "You know what really bothers me about performers like you? You take up space that should go to new talent. You've had your time. Why not step aside gracefully and let fresh voices be heard?" The words hung in the air like a poison cloud. Cliff sat back, pale and silent. The man who had filled stadiums, who had given joy to generations, now looked deeply wounded. I think he said quietly. That every artist deserves to be treated with basic respect, regardless of age or career stage. I've never tried to take opportunities from anyone. Kay stepped in, her voice low and strained. Sir Cliff, perhaps we can talk about your charity work. You've raised millions over the years. Denise rolled her eyes. Oh yes, the charity angle. The audience was no longer smiling. What had begun as a daytime chat had turned into a televised character assassination, one that would dominate headlines for weeks and leave viewers asking a haunting question. When did entertainment turn into cruelty? Denise didn't even let Cliff finish his breath. So that's the trick now, is it? She cut in, eyes narrowing. A little charity here and there to keep your name in the papers when the music isn't enough anymore. That was the line that detonated the room. The audience, already shifting uncomfortably in their seats, erupted into a wave of horrified gasps. One voice from the back rang out, loud and furious. That's disgusting! Cliff's complexion shifted, from shocked pallor to a deep, wounded red. His posture stiffened as he leaned forward, and for the first time the polished knight of British pop could no longer hide the hurt. My charitable work? He said, his voice trembling with disbelief. Are you seriously suggesting that helping sick children and supporting causes I care about is just some publicity gimmick? Do you have any idea how offensive that is? Nadia Sawalha's face was white with outrage. She turned sharply toward Denise. Denise, that's beyond unfair. Sir Cliff has helped countless people. How dare you question his motives? Oh, I'll question whatever I like, Denise snapped, her lip curling into something that barely resembled a smile. This is my show. If Cliff can't handle a few hard truths, then maybe he shouldn't be here. Hard truths? Linda Robson's voice cracked like thunder, usually calm, now furious. These aren't questions. You're just being cruel. It's vile, Denise. Absolutely vile. Denise spun toward Linda, eyes blazing. Don't you dare lecture me on how to do my job. I'm not here to massage egos and toss softballs at has-beens. Has-been? The word struck Cliff like a punch. He flinched, physically recoiled, as though she had slapped him across the face. For a moment he couldn't speak at all. Then Kay Adams stood up from her seat, a breach of live TV protocol so severe that even the cameras hesitated to follow her. Denise, she said, voice shaking with controlled rage. I will not sit here and watch you humiliate our guest. Sir Cliff, on behalf of this show, I am deeply, deeply sorry. Sit down, Kay. Denise didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. The icy command was enough. Don't apologize for me doing what real journalists should do. That was the final spark. Cliff rose slowly from his chair, 73 years old, but standing with the dignity of a man 10 feet tall. The room fell into a stunned silence. I have spent over 50 years in this profession, he said, each word steady, resonant, impossible to ignore. I have faced the toughest interviewers in the world. I have endured painful questions about my life. But never, never have I been treated with such unprofessional cruelty as I have today. Denise inhaled sharply to interrupt, but Cliff lifted his hand, calm, firm, commanding. You have questioned my relevance, mocked my age, dismissed my music. And now you insult the very charity work that has nothing to do with fame and everything to do with helping other people. You show contempt not just for me, but for the millions who have supported my career with love and loyalty. The panelists sat frozen. Nadia blinked through tears. Linda nodded fiercely. Kay remained standing, refusing, defiantly, to sit back down. I came here to celebrate my return to the stage, Cliff continued, to talk about a tour that thousands are excited for. Instead, I've had to defend my very right to still exist as an artist. Denise, her confidence beginning to fracture, under the weight of the audience's support, attempted one more jab. "Are you quite finished with your little speech?" she muttered, but the venom was thinning. Cliff looked her directly in the eyes. "What saddens me most," he said quietly, "is that some young artist may be watching this. Someone with dreams, someone just starting. And they might think that this is how we treat each other in this industry. That cruelty is normal, acceptable, expected." Applause erupted, louder than before. People rose to their feet. The studio transformed into a standing ovation for the man who had refused to bow his head. In the control room, alarms were metaphorically ringing. Producers scrambled, hands hovering over the button to force a commercial break. Denise's face reddened, not from righteous fury anymore, but from the realization that she had lost the room, completely. And then, with a voice that could have frozen steel, she tried, "Well, if you're so upset about being challenged, maybe you should stick to playing to your little fan clubs." Denise sneered, her voice dripping with condescension, "Where everyone tells you how wonderful you are." Cliff's eyes lowered for a brief moment, then lifted again, steady and full of quiet sadness. "There it is again," he said softly. "The contempt. Not just for me, but for the people who have supported me, loved my music and found comfort in it. You're not just belittling me, Denise. You're belittling every person who's ever found joy in a song I've sung. Their memories, their emotions. You've just dismissed them as meaningless." Nadia Sawala could no longer sit still. She turned directly to the camera. "To everyone watching, I want to make it absolutely clear that what's happening right now does not represent this show or this panel. Sir Cliff Richard is a gentleman and a legend, and he deserves far more respect than this." "Out of line, Nadia," Denise snapped, but her voice faltered. "No," Linda Robson said firmly, her own voice trembling with conviction. She turned to face the audience. "Nadia's right. This is disgraceful, and I'm ashamed to be sitting here while it happens." Cliff looked at them, the women who had stood up for him when it counted, his expression softening with gratitude. "Thank you," he said quietly. "That kindness means more than you know, but I think it's clear that I'm not welcome here." He began unclipping his microphone, each movement deliberate, dignified. The air in the studio grew heavy, electric, the audience collectively holding its breath. "Running away already," Denise called after him, her voice cracking under the strain. "I thought you were tougher than this." Cliff stopped mid-motion, turned slowly back toward her. "Tougher than this," he repeated, his voice calm, but carrying a gravity that made the room still. "Denise, I've survived 50 years in an industry that eats people alive. I've been torn apart by critics, lied about by newspapers, and stood in front of the world when it would have been easier to hide. But I've never confused cruelty with courage, and I've never mistaken bullying for strength." Silence. Even the cameras seemed to hum louder in the absence of words. "Real toughness," he continued, his voice now firm, resonant, "is treating people with respect. Even when you disagree with them, real strength is lifting others up, not tearing them down. What you've done here today isn't strong, Denise. It's just sad." Denise's face drained of color, then flushed bright red. The murmuring audience was turning fully against her now. "Don't you dare lecture me about strength!" she shot back, her voice shaking. "You don't know anything about what I've been through." "You're right," Cliff said gently. "I don't, just as you don't know what I've been through. But I would never use my pain as an excuse to cause more. That's the difference between us." The words landed like a quiet thunderclap. Denise's expression faltered, anger melting into something more fragile, almost like shame. Kay Adams, sensing the enormity of the moment, stepped toward Cliff. "Sir Cliff, please, don't let this change how you see us, or this show. This isn't who we are." "I know it isn't," Cliff said kindly. "You've shown me grace and decency today, all three of you. I can see the values you stand for, even if they weren't shared by everyone at this table." Linda was openly crying now. "I'm so sorry, Sir Cliff. You deserve so much better than this. We all do." A murmur rippled through the audience. No longer gasps or whispers, but voices of support. Someone shouted from the back, "We love you, Cliff," and others echoed it, their applause swelling. Denise, pale and cornered, lashed out one last time. "Well, at least when I'm forgotten, it'll be because I stood for something real. Not because I spent my career singing lightweight pop songs that meant nothing to anyone." The studio erupted. Gasps turned into shouts. A woman in the front row stood and yelled, "How dare you!" Her voice rang through the air. But Cliff didn't flinch. He simply looked at Denise. Not with anger. Not even disappointment. But something far heavier. Pity. And somehow, that silence, that calm, steady pity, was the loudest moment of all. "Denise," he said softly, his voice somehow cutting through the chaos like a calm note in a storm. "I genuinely feel sorry for you, to live with that much bitterness, that much need to tear others down. It must be exhausting." The words weren't shouted. They weren't even sharp, but their simplicity, their complete absence of anger, struck harder than any outburst could. Denise's shoulders slumped. The fight drained from her face as she looked around. At the audience, whose eyes burned with disapproval. At her colleagues who couldn't meet her gaze. At the cameras that had captured her unraveling in real time. For the first time all morning, she seemed to realize what she had done. Nadia Sawalha rose from her seat and crossed the stage toward Cliff. "Sir Cliff," she said, voice steady but full of emotion, "please accept my personal apology, and the apology of everyone who still believes in treating guests with dignity and respect." Cliff gave a faint, gracious smile. "Of course I do, Nadia. Your kindness throughout this ordeal has been a bright spot in a very dark moment." The audience erupted in applause. It wasn't polite. It was fierce, heartfelt, and loud. A collective stand against cruelty and in defense of decency. Denise sat motionless at the presenter's desk, isolated and humiliated. The applause rose around her like a wave, drowning out any illusion of control she still had. Cliff turned to the audience, taking in their faces, their empathy, their energy. He raised a hand in a small, grateful wave, and the cheers grew even louder. Then he faced the camera directly. "To everyone watching at home," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "please remember, kindness costs nothing, but it's worth everything. Don't let anyone convince you that cruelty is strength, or that tearing others down builds you up. We can, and must, do better than that." With that, he turned and began walking toward the exit. The audience rose to their feet in a standing ovation that shook the studio walls. The remaining 3 panelists joined in, their applause mingling with looks of admiration and guilt. At the edge of the set, Cliff stopped. He looked back once, not at Denise, but at the audience who had stood by him. Placing a hand over his heart, he gave a final humble nod. The gesture brought tears to more than a few eyes. Denise stayed frozen at her desk, staring blankly after him. The man she had tried to ridicule had walked away not diminished, but elevated, his dignity shining brighter for having been tested. The camera lingered on her face as the reality sank in. She had wanted to expose a relic, a fading star clinging to old glory. Instead, she had exposed herself as everything the public despised about modern media: cynical, cruel, self-righteous. A suffocating silence filled the studio. No one knew what to say. Finally, Kay Adams spoke into the hush. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice trembling slightly, "we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll be discussing the importance of treating one another with respect and dignity." The screen faded to commercial, but the audience didn't stop talking. The hum of disbelief filled the air, some shaking their heads, others muttering about what they'd just witnessed. And then, just before the cut to black, the cameras caught one last haunting image. Denise Welch sitting alone at the presenter's desk, her head in her hands, while the empty chair beside her stood as a silent monument to dignity. In the face of cruelty, the man who had walked into that studio as a beloved entertainer had walked out as something far greater, a symbol of grace under pressure, of kindness in the face of malice, and proof that real strength isn't measured by how loudly you speak, but by how quietly you rise above.